Hello, my name is Emmanuel, and today I'm here interviewing Khalid Uddin.
Hey, how's it going?
Would you like to tell us a bit about what you do?
Sure. My day job is an English teacher, and outside of that, I'm a writer and published author. So that's my biggest passion is the fantasy series I'm working on,
What's the name of your fantasy series?
the Drowned Realm series. The first book is called Rise of the Red Harbinger. The second book is The Ghost of Asher, and the third book that was just released this year is World on Fire. And I'm working on the final installment right now.
All right, so today I'm here to ask him a couple questions. So, starting with the first question is, what inspired you to become a writer?
So when I started off in college, I definitely had some issues like figuring out what I wanted to do, and I kind of found my escape in like reading and especially fantasy novels, and that kind of just like spurred me on to think like I could be a writer, and that combined with like a lot of the I think adventures and just stories I had with like my group of friends, just kind of intertwined and just ended up being the basis for the story I started writing.
All right, for your second question, it's which author or stories were your biggest inspiration?
So definitely with fantasy, it was Robert Jordan. He wrote the Wheel of Time series, and that was the first like uh, full series that I read, and completely grasped. So that's kind of what opened my mind up to this like fantasy genre, and just made me realize that that's like out there, and I could actually write in or be a writer in that type of genre. But aside from him, I've always liked science fiction, like Michael Crichton, Mary Shelley, those types of stories. Just because, again, it just like made me realize that there are some really fun stories out there that don't have to always be realistic.
All right, for your third question, how was your upbringing or background shape your writing?
So my cultural background is Guyanese, and growing up, a lot of people didn't know what that was, and it definitely kind of formed a basis or like a starting point for the main character, in my stories, where um, the part of the world that he's from, nobody's like really heard of, and he has to do a lot of explaining about his background and stuff like that. So it was definitely a reflection of me and the experiences that I went through, in my own life.
For your fourth question, how had your story evolved from its initial conception to the final product?
So it started off as just like scenes, like just kind of images in my head of things happening there, here and there, and then over time it evolved into more of a world, and things kind of coming together. And then once I was finally ready to start writing, I realized like there's a whole world out there. I had fleshed out characters, and it was almost like this whole second world that just existed in my head. So it definitely took time though. We're talking like probably a good 7 8 years from like the time that I just started imagining this whole story to when I started writing it down with all the world building.
Are there any characters or events in the story based on real people or events?
Yeah, so initially, when I started writing that, a lot of the main characters were based on personalities of like my friends, people that I was close with. As the story went along, I kind of got away with that because I just needed to have that baseline, that basis, like for these characters to be a little more human and realistic. So it started off that way. I kind of got away from that as the story progressed.
What themes do you try and convey in your story?
Um, well, similar to how my own like culture is with like not a lot of people being aware of it when I grew up. That was definitely one thing I wanted to incorporate was just underrepresented people. So the cultures and the mythology that goes along like that my story incorporates. Um, it's based on a lot of like cultures and people like in real life that maybe there's not a lot of exposure or understanding about.
How do you go about writing? Do you have an outline for your story, or do you start writing without any specific plan in mind?
I always have an outline. I don't always follow it, but at least it gives me some direction. I try to let my characters kind of dictate where the story is going. So generally, I obviously have a pretty good understanding of them and like um, events that I want to happen and interactions and like how they're going to progress through the story. But a lot of times that changes in the process of writing, where I realize in the moment that maybe a character is going to react differently or do something differently than what I originally intended. So I kind of let that go in the direction that feels the most genuine.
Have you ever had writer's block? How do you overcome it?
Um, it's interesting. I thought very differently about writer's block up until a few years ago, and it started. Actually, I was interviewing another author on my podcast that I used to do, and she kind of explained like her view that writer's block is really only a thing if you don't know where you're going next, and it kind of opened my eyes to like made me realize that as long as I'm planning ahead, as long as I like outline properly or just plot things out like well enough, or think things through well enough, then I won't fall into that trap. And honestly, ever since then, that's like kind of been my mindset when it comes to just hitting that block, is like as long as I figure out what comes next, then I have something to go with. And it's an easiest way to avoid writer's block.
How do you balance writing with other aspects of your life?
Um, Generally, I try to write when there's nothing else going on, in my house. So when it's quietest, and a lot of times that ends up being at nighttime, when everybody's asleep. But I feel like, if there's something you're really passionate about, then you probably have to make some type of sacrifice with something else to make it happen. And I find that most of the time that sacrifice means watching less TV, playing less video games, maybe losing a little sleep, just to get writing done. And for me, it's all worth it to to at least focus on that instead of the other stuff.
What do you want readers to take away from your story?
Um, I just want them to like at least appreciate it as like maybe a different type of fantasy story. I've always pitched it as very character driven and a little more of like a comic book essence to a fantasy story. And aside from that, just the rich visuals and the rich mythology that I've tried to incorporate into the story.
Have you ever had to deal with criticism, and how do you deal with it?
I think more so early on, like with like putting the story together. I don't mind criticism as long as it's from a real place where the person actually read the story and has like something real to criticize. So it's just gives me something to work with and something to do better. So for instance, I think the biggest criticism in book one was that like people wanted to see more interactions with the characters or more downtime, just more exposure to like the simple things that go on. And I get that. So, it was definitely a conscious effort to make that more of a thing in the second and third book, and that's fine. Like I have no problem with people seeing issues in my writing. It's more when people like leave like a 2-star review or a 3-star review without actually saying why. Then that doesn't really do anything. At least tell me like what you didn't like or what was wrong with it, so I can work on it and make it better.
What drives you to keep writing?
I think it's just passion, and like excitement, coming up with ideas that like I'm excited about. Like sometimes you have to take a step away from writing, but I always find that like I'm drawn back to it, once I've got the energy or once the voices kind of start talking in my head. Um, it's just, like having ideas that you're excited about, like no matter how tired you are or busy you are, you'll always find a way to do it because you're excited about it.
What was the editing process like?
Grueling. No, I think when you're a new writer, you think you have to do everything perfectly, and you think like your first draft has to be perfect, and you don't realize until you start like interacting with more other writers and talking to other professionals that like that's not the case. Your first draft is allowed to be bad, and it should be bad, and then you rewrite it. So you have to kind of be willing to have that patience, like to understand that it's a long process, and also be willing to take feedback. When I first started working with an editor, it was really tough to let certain things go, and you have to realize that there are people in the industry that are more experienced than you, know more than you do, know what works better, um, and there's an expression in the I guess the writing circle called like "kill your babies." Sometimes it's like the things that you hold dearest to that you have to be willing to let go, just because they don't work. So you also just again have to trust sometimes that. other people are more experienced than you and to know what they're talking about more than you do. So it can be frustrating, that whole editing process. Even like for instance in book three, there were definitely some components that I was really excited to keep in that didn't make the cut because it just didn't like make sense, or maybe like it let a scene on too long or whatever it is. And you just have to understand that, okay, you know what, like this person read the story, and that's like their opinion and that's their feedback, and maybe it makes sense.
What was your experience with publishing?
I got a little lucky with the publishing process where I had an editor uh, like looking at like the first manuscript, and about 10 chapters in, about maybe 12 or so, like almost halfway through the book, um, they ran it by like a independent publisher that they knew well, and the independent publisher is the one that just reached out and said that they would like me to uh, be an author under their label. So if anything, I kind of like fell backwards into the publishing process before I had even like thought that far. So like I said, I just kind of got lucky with it.
Do you have any methods or techniques that you use to get into the mood for writing?
For me, it's all about like playlists. Honestly, I have like a playlist. Actually, when I started off, I had a playlist for every chapter, and then it kind of just evolved into longer playlists for like the whole book. And again, that's kind of what gets me into the writing mode. Just like certain songs will elicit, certain moods in me, or just like make me think about certain scenes. So that's basically how I get into the zone. Like, and I'm always listening to music anyway, so sometimes like those playlists will be the commute to work, the commute home, so that way like my head is just thinking about the story.
Do you have any other advice for aspiring writers?
Yeah. So first, get started. No matter where you are in the process, like just start writing, because you'll keep thinking you have to wait for the perfect time, or you have to like think your story through a little more. But um, a bad story is better than no story. So, get it down, like start writing sooner rather than later. So at least you have something to work with and build off of. And that way you can show it to other people, which is kind of the second piece of advice, which is, you know, get into writing circles, like expand your horizons and like talk to other writers in the process, because they're the ones that are going to open doors for you, critique your work, or look at your work, or introduce you to other people, and that's really what this industry is all about. Is the idea that there's space for everybody. You don't really have to compete, like say in like the business world. The arts, the whole world appreciates it, and it's not like there's like ever going to be a shortage of books or people like stopping reading. So, just start writing and start, talking to more people, putting yourself out there.
Do you have any where can like if you wanted to find your work, where can they find you?
So, you can definitely find it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com. I believe Walmart has them as well, and then on my website, KhalidUddin.com. So yeah, it's all there.
All right. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, Khaled, for coming and letting me interview you.
Thank you, my pleasure. It was fun.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.